each of these, okay? Here's all of our sampling methods. Talk to your neighbor about how you could do that, and try to make it different from the ones that we just went over, okay? Make it slightly different. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? How could you sample 100 people, ask them how much time they spend doing their homework with each of those? Go. All right, hey, let's just quickly go over this. So convenience, what does that mean? Easy to access, right? I'm just talking to people I can talk to easy. We don't like that bias. What does self-selected mean? Volunteer. We don't like that either. People with strong opinions, okay? Random, what is the definition? Equally likely chance. We do like random, okay? Stratified, how are you splitting them up? By like some kind of group commonality, and then you ask random group, you get a random sample from each group. Cluster is mini population. What is systematic? Every 10th person, every 7th person, yeah, exactly. Okay, let's just go over some quick vocab and I want to show you a video. So, parameter versus statistic, okay? So a parameter is a characteristic of the population, and a statistic is a characteristic of our sample, okay? The way you remember that is parameter starts with P, just like population, and statistic starts with an S, just like sample. So now, if we were talking about mean, for example, and it was our population mean, it's going to be a parameter because it's our population. But if it was our statistic, it would be a sample. Okay? So, I'm not going to get too much into depth with that. We could have gone over the symbols and learned some crazy things. Let's just actually show you that because you are going to see those next lesson. But when I'm talking about the population, the symbol that we use for mean is actually the Greek letter mu. Have you seen that before? So if I'm talking about population mean, which is a parameter, because it's coming from our population, we use the symbol mu. For proportion, we just use P. And for standard deviation, we use, it's like an O with a line, we call that sigma. If we're just referring to our sample, so we're talking about statistics, our sample mean is a symbol X with the bar over it. Our sample proportion is P with the hat on it. And our sample standard deviation is S sub X. Now, we're just going over that. You don't have to memorize those just yet, but you might see those in the future. So remember, parameters come from population, statistics come from samples. Let's do a quick example here. Did you have that written down? Let me give you 10 more seconds, because some were still right. Okay. At the most recent faculty meeting, the counseling center said that the average ACT score of juniors at Hunter High was 18. Mr. Solberg thinks it should be higher. He takes a sample of 35 juniors and finds their average score to be 20. Okay, so let's go one at a time. What is the population? Who are we referring to here for the population? Yes. Okay, no. Oh, there it goes. All right. So that's going to be juniors at Hunter High. Okay? So then the individual is going to be just one junior, right? I'm going to kind of not highlight that, but that's okay. Okay, so then what was the parameter? Remember, the parameter is a description of the entire population. So what was the number that we used to describe the entire population? 18. That was counseling center. We looked at all of the scores, and the average was 18. Mr. Solberg's like, that seems too low. So who was his sample? These 35 juniors. Okay. So I go and I take this sample of 35 juniors, and I say, hey, what was your ACT score, and what's the number that they give me? 20. Now, I tried to highlight that, but maybe it would look easier if I just wrote it out this other way. So here's our population here. And it's going to be Hunter High School juniors. And what the counseling center said was that their average score, mu, was 20. Or was 18, thank you. Well, then here comes Solberg. And let's assume this was a random sample. He's going to take a sample of 35. And I say that the sample mean was 20. Where over here was only 18. So do you see the difference between a statistic and a parameter? Statistics come from samples, parameters come from proportions, okay? Or come from populations. Those words are too close. Okay, do an example with your neighbor. Go. By the way, there's a typo here. That number is too low. He thinks that number is too low, not too high. All right, Spencer, I got to go to you on this one because you're wearing a Star Wars hoodie, right? This should be right down your alley. What's going on in this problem? Yeah. So when a study was saying that only 47% of U.S. adults, so our population here, U.S. adults, so the parameter here was 47%, and since it was a population parameter, we use the symbol P. And I'm going to write it as a decimal. P is 0.47. But when Luke did his sample of 100 people, by the way, if I put n equals 100, n is your sample size, what was the sample proportion that Luke got? So I'm going to write that as P hat, because it was our sample statistic. Okay, this is a statistic from our sample, so that's what it would look like. There you go. How many of you guys have seen Return of the Jedi? Not enough, like, really, Ewoks? That whole Jar Jar scene where... Anyway, good stuff. You need to go watch Return of the Jedi. It's a good one. Okay, now, let's move on. and we're going to talk about other ways that our data could be biased. We talked about two methods that are biased. What were those two methods? Voluntary response and convenience. No bueno. Now, sometimes, even if we have a random sample, if we're sampling right, people can still screw it up by doing some things by the way they ask the questions, okay? Now, I'm actually going to just jump right to a video here that I want to show you guys. And what I want you to do is, as we watch this video, look for how is this biased? What's going on here that makes us think, that doesn't seem right, okay? Now, just to kind of give you some background on what's going on here, this is a British show, so if you're like, can't understand, they have an accent, that's what's going on. But they're talking about bringing back the national service. What the national service is once boys were graduated from high school, they were automatically enlisted into the military. So they're kind of having a discussion about should we bring back the national service, okay? Let me find this real quick. Let's get our sound here. Okay, here we go.
He's going to say something new and radical in the broadcast.
What, that silly grand design? Bernard, that was precisely what you had to avoid. How did this come about? I shall need a very good explanation.
Well, he's very keen on it.
What's that got to do with it? Things don't happen just because prime ministers are very keen on them. Neville Chamberlain was very keen on peace.
He thinks it's a vote winner.
Ah, that's more serious, no. What makes him think that?
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
Well, I have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
Okay, so pause there. So they're talking about why they're making a decision. They said there's a survey done, and people are trying to bring back national service. And what does he respond with? We'll just do a different survey and show that they're not in favor of doing national service. Or is it doing the national service? That's what he called it, right? Let me go back.
We can't be... Well, I haven't...
Well, the party...
That's more serious, no. What makes him think that?
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
Well, I have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
We can't be for it and
Of
against.
course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed?
Yes, well, not me, actually, my house. Oh, I see what you mean.
Bernard, you know what happens. A nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you? No, so she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Willing, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favour of reintroducing national service?
Yes. Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions, they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result.
How?
Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
There are, you see, Bernard. The perfect balanced sample.
Okay, so who can summarize what just happened there? Peyton, I'm calling on you. Go ahead. Uh-huh. There you go. Do you think that happens when people are surveying? Yeah, one of the first things you need to realize is that when people are doing surveys or they're asking for opinions, the reason why they're doing opinion polls because they have something they want. They have some kind of like motivation. They're trying to accomplish something, but they need public support to do it. Let me tell you a great example of this. And it's coming from, you can't see it right here. Let me scroll down. A great TV show called dun, 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 Parks and Rec. How many of you guys have watched Parks and Rec? Oh, good job. We got 4. The rest of you, guess what your homework assignment is going to be? To go and watch Season 1, Episode 1 of Parks and Rec. Now, but I can teach you. Let me tell you the premise of it, okay? This is, what's her name? Leslie Knope. She works for the Parks and Rec department. And as the name suggests, they're in charge of parks and recreation. Okay, so in the first episode, she is greeted by Anne. It's Anne, right? Anne's her best friend, or turns out to be her best friend. Spoiler. And Anne is upset because her boyfriend fell into an abandoned construction site in their city. There was going to be this construction, they ran out of money, and now it's just this pit. And her boyfriend fell in the pit and broke her leg. So Anne comes to complain to Leslie, and they're like, hey, well, why don't we turn that into a park? Well, if they want to turn this pit into a park, they need the public's backing on it. So they decide they're going to go and survey people in their neighborhood and ask them, would they like to turn that pit into a park? And she has this great quote where she says, I've learned that I can get anyone to answer a question exactly how I like them if I phrase the question correctly. So, for example, one of the questions she asks is, wouldn't you rather have a park than a storage place for nuclear waste? Does that seem a little iffy? Yeah, but because how are people going to respond to that? Well, duh, I want a park. The other way she asks it is she says, wouldn't you agree, like most decent Americans, that we should turn that pit into a beautiful public park? How is that leading people? Yeah, you're not a decent American. The other thing is if I say, wouldn't you agree, most people agree. They like to agree with people. They don't like conflict, right? So the funny part is that she then goes and she's like having people like, they're just having battles with it. Because people are like, no, actually, I don't want a park. And then she starts offending people, so they show up and start like causing problems. Anyway, it's a great show. I would recommend it. I think it's on Peacock now. Is it still on Netflix? I don't know. But you guys should watch it. But if your parents get offended, I didn't tell you to watch it, okay? Blame it on Mr. Collins. Said he said it. Okay. All right, now there's other ways that questions could be bad. Other ways, just real quick, or sometimes they'll ask you 2 questions at once. We call that a double-barreled question. For example, if someone says, do you have a good relationship with your friends and family? How could that be a problem? Maybe someone has a good relationship with one but not the other. How do they open that? Or how do they answer that? There's another question that said, it was talking about presidents. They said, does this candidate have the skills and experience to be a good president? What are they really just asking? Do they have the skills and do they have the experience? Could those be very different things? But if that's a yes or no, then it's kind of like, I don't know how to answer that. Sometimes survey questions have double negatives. Do you know what a double negative is? What's a double negative? Oh, come on, guys. 2 negatives. So, Mikkel, you have an example?
I'd like if you, double negative is positive, so if you say, like, someone asks you to help move, you say, don't. I don't know.
How about I give you an example? Is this okay? I'm coming. Give me a second.
You can't lie. So tell me, puppet, where is Shrek?
I don't know where he's not.
You're telling me you don't know where Shrek is?
It wouldn't be inaccurate to assume that I couldn't exactly not say that the answer is almost partially incorrect.
So you do know where he is?
On the contrary, I'm possibly more or less not definitely rejecting the idea that in no way, with any amount of uncertainty, that I undeniably
Stop it!
do or do not know where he should probably be. If that indeed wasn't where he isn't, even if he wasn't not where I knew he was, I mean, enough! Trick the dog to bring back the next air! Oh!
Okay, so if a question is along the lines of like, do you disagree that we should not do this? What is that question even asking at that point? It's like, wait, so does that mean I'm agreeing, or does that I'm confused? If they're set up in that way, then it's also biased. The way people are set up, like how they're dressed, the way they ask it, that can all influence. Okay, we're going to wrap this up with just a quick discussion about the difference between an observational study and an experiment. In an observational study, guess what you're doing? You're watching, okay? Do you know what this is? Jane Goodall, good job. She's a monkey lady. Guess what she did for most of her life? She just watched monkeys. Yeah. Cool. Have you watched this show? What would you do? Isn't it fun? It's a fun show. You put people in awkward situations and see what they do, and you just watch and you observe, okay? Now, observational studies, that's where you watch. But they don't really allow us to make cause and effect decisions. In order to do cause and effect, we need to do an experiment. You guys all did the science fair, right? Did you do science fair experiments? Some said no. Shame. Well, we should do one maybe, I don't know. My daughter came home from school one day and it said, I need to do a science fair project. And I'm like, you're in the first grade. Do you know what that means? I did the science fair project, and you know what? She took second place. So, booyah. Anyway, in an experiment, you're trying to come up with, like, what you're trying to show is cause and effect. Okay, so for example, for my daughter, we said, what role does baking soda have with cookies? So we decided to make a batch of cookies, and then we did a batch of cookies without baking soda, and then we did a batch of cookies with, like, double the amount of baking soda. So we were trying to see what effect the baking soda had. That was our variable. And then we let people eat them and decide which ones they liked more. That was basically it. But then at the end of the day, we could have cause and effect. Now, why did I need to have a group that was normal? We call that a control group. And they can compare it with something, right? So if I just did all or nothing, then they don't have anything to compare it with, okay? For example, if I'm, as a teacher, if I was like, you know, this strategy hasn't been working, I want to try changing it, it wouldn't make sense for me to, like, do something in the first quarter and then compare it to something I did in the second quarter and change all my classes. Because in the first quarter, what are your guys' attitudes towards school? We're back, I'm going to work hard, and then what happens in the second quarter? You're like, oh, is this summer yet? My heavens. So if I was like, hey, I'm going to make this change for all of my classes, and I'm going to do it in the first quarter, and then not do it in the second quarter, I might think, wow, that was really effective because in the first quarter their grades were great, in the second quarter it went down, right? But really what happened? Their motivation just kind of, it was high to begin with, it just went down, right? So what I should do is I should split my classes up, and maybe A days I do it and B days I don't. So that way, whether it's the first quarter or not, it doesn't really make a difference. Okay, now, big takeaway from this, we like experiments because then I can show cause and effect. If I'm just doing observational studies, I can't really show that. Because sometimes we observe things, but there's something else that's going on. For example, there were people doing an observational study about ice cream sales and children drowning. And what they found was that there was a positive correlation between them, which meant as ice cream sales went up,